A police officer and his loyal German shepherd were patrolling the quiet streets of a small Montana town when they saw her, a little girl standing alone in the cold, staring at an abandoned house with tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered, "Mom, Dad, I'm home." And the weight in her voice was enough to stop them in their tracks. What they discovered next would break their hearts and change their lives forever. What happened after will restore your faith in love, family, and second chances. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe every child deserves a safe place to call home, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world. The late autumn wind carried a quiet bite in the small town of Clearwater, Montana. A thin veil of mist clung to the edges of the streets, softening the glow of the old lampposts and muting the colors of the town. The sun had long slipped behind the jagged outline of the Bitterroot Mountains, and the day's warmth had fled with it, leaving the air crisp and smelling faintly of pine and damp leaves. Officer Daniel Hayes, 35, guided his patrol car down a narrow residential road that ran alongside the old riverbank. He was a tall man with a solid build, the kind forged from years in the Army before trading his fatigues for the dark navy uniform of the Clearwater Police Department. His brown hair was kept short out of habit, his jawline strong, and his eyes clear gray often gave away more compassion than his stoic demeanor intended. Those eyes had seen enough of the world's cruelty to make him cautious, but not enough to drain him of hope. He wore his duty like a quiet promise, to protect those who could not protect themselves. In the passenger seat sat Rex, his partner in both work and life. The German shepherd was 4 years old, with a thick sable and black coat that gleamed under streetlight halos. His ears were always alert, his amber eyes intelligent and searching. Unlike some canines with a fierce edge, Rex had a calm, watchful presence, confident but approachable. He had been with Daniel for 3 years, during which they'd learned to move as one, often understanding each other's intentions without a word. Rex was disciplined and fearless, but had a gentleness in him that showed itself most when dealing with children. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled over a small town after dinner time. Most homes had lights on in their windows, casting warm rectangles onto the ground. Daniel preferred these late patrols. The stillness helped him think, sometimes too much. As they turned a corner, the beam from the patrol car's headlights swept over something unusual. A small figure stood at the edge of the sidewalk, framed by the skeletal outline of a tall wooden fence and an old, weathered house behind it. She was motionless, her head slightly bowed, hands clenched into the sleeves of her coat. Daniel slowed the car, pulling over to the curb. The girl couldn't have been more than 9. Her coat was faded, the kind of dull blue that comes from too many winters, and her boots were scuffed with patches of salt. Wisps of chestnut hair had escaped from under her knit cap, sticking to her damp cheeks. Her eyes, wide, red-rimmed and glistening, were fixed on the house behind her. Daniel stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching on the thin layer of frost forming on the sidewalk. "Hey there," he said gently, approaching with the kind of caution he'd learned was needed when dealing with frightened children. "Are you lost?" The girl didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Instead, her gaze stayed locked on the old house. It stood 2 stories high, its clapboard siding faded to a washed-out gray, shutters hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The front porch sagged under the weight of years, and weeds had claimed the yard. To anyone else, it was just another abandoned property. But to this little girl, Daniel could see it meant something more. He glanced back at Rex, who had jumped down from the patrol car. The dog approached slowly, each step measured, his body language calm. Daniel had seen Rex work enough to know the shepherd sensed fear and sadness in equal measure. When Rex reached her, he sat down at her side without making a sound, his head tilted slightly, ears forward, eyes steady on her face. Slowly, he leaned in just enough for his nose to brush her hand. The girl flinched barely, but then her fingers uncurled. She touched the top of Rex's head hesitantly, as if making sure he was real. Daniel knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "That's Rex. He's a good listener," he said, his voice soft. "What's your name?" She finally turned her head toward him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Emily. Emily," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Are you okay?" Her lower lip trembled. She looked back at the house and blinked hard. That was my home." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. He didn't press her for details, not yet. Instead, he asked, "Is someone here with you? Do they know you're out?" She shook her head. The cold was beginning to creep through Daniel's gloves. "Emily, it's chilly out here. Would you like to sit in the car for a bit? It's warmer." Her small shoulders stiffened, and he saw the hesitation in her eyes. That was when Rex stood and gave a short, quiet whine, not demanding, but reassuring. Emily's eyes softened as she looked at him, and after a moment she gave a small nod. Daniel stood, offering his hand. She didn't take it, but she followed him, with Rex walking protectively between them. When they reached the patrol car, Daniel opened the back door. Emily slid inside, Rex hopping up beside her without waiting for permission. Daniel sat in the driver's seat, keeping his tone casual. "So, you were just looking at the house?" Emily nodded. "I used to live there, with my mom and dad." Her voice caught, the words trembling in the cold air. "They're gone now." Daniel didn't ask how. The way she said it told him the loss wasn't recent, but the wound was still raw. "They died 3 years ago," she continued softly. "I live at the children's home now, but sometimes I just want to see it again." Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. Emily was resting her head against Rex's side, her fingers absently curling into his fur. Rex stayed perfectly still, his steady warmth doing what words couldn't. Daniel knew the house she meant. He'd passed it plenty of times on patrol, just another old place waiting for someone to decide its fate. But now, it wasn't just an empty building. It was a piece of this little girl's life, maybe the last tangible connection she had to her parents. For a long moment, the only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the faint rustle of wind through the trees outside. Daniel's instincts told him this was more than a simple welfare check, and Rex's calm, unwavering presence was telling him the same thing. Daniel let the engine hum in the background, its low vibration a faint warmth in the cold night. Outside, the mist still clung to the street, curling around the sagging fence posts of the house like fingers reluctant to let go. Rex had made himself comfortable beside Emily in the back seat, his head resting on his paws, eyes steady on her as if she were the only person in the world that mattered at that moment. Daniel turned slightly in his seat so he could see her more clearly. "Emily Carter," he repeated softly, rolling the name over as though committing it to memory. "That's a pretty name. How long have you been staying at the children's home?" She shifted under her oversized coat, her voice so quiet it was almost lost beneath the steady breath of the heater. "Almost 2 years." Daniel nodded slowly, watching her fingers absently twist the end of her knit cap. Her gaze was drawn back toward the old house outside. "And that place? You said it was yours?" Emily nodded, her lips pressed together. "It used to be. Me, Mom, and Dad lived there until—" She hesitated, the sentence trailing into the heavy air. Daniel didn't push, but she swallowed hard and continued. "They died. A car accident. 3 years ago." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, as though refusing to let the tears fall where he could see. Rex gave a slow, rumbling sigh and shifted closer to her, resting his head gently on her lap. She stroked the fur along his neck, her shoulders easing as the warmth of the dog seeped into her. Daniel knew grief when he heard it. He'd carried enough of it himself to recognize the sharp edges in someone else's voice. "Do you have any other family around here?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No. After the accident, I stayed with a foster family for a while, but it didn't work out. They sent me to the home." He imagined the home she was talking about, the low, brick building near the edge of town, run by the county. He'd been there before on call sometimes to check on a fight between the older kids, sometimes just to deliver donations. The staff worked hard, but it was no place for a child to grow up if there was another option. "Does the home know you're here tonight?" Emily's small shoulders hunched, a silent confession. Daniel leaned back in his seat and exhaled. "You know they'll be worried if they realize you're gone." She looked up at him then, her voice trembling but determined. I just wanted to see it again. I'm not allowed inside. They said it's dangerous." Her eyes flicked back to the shadowed windows of the house. "But I remember everything. The smell of Mom's apple pie in the kitchen, Dad fixing the porch steps every summer, my bedroom with the yellow curtains." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to forget." Daniel glanced at Rex, who was still beside her, head rising and falling in a slow rhythm. The dog's calm, steady presence seemed to hold her together in a way no words could. From outside, the creak of a screen door echoed faintly. Daniel looked up to see a figure standing on the porch of the house next door. Mrs. Sarah Whitfield was a tall, willowy woman in her late 60s, wrapped in a thick brown cardigan that looked hand-knitted. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her sharp blue eyes, though softened with age, held the keen awareness of someone who missed little. Sarah had lived on this street her whole life. Widowed for over a decade, she was known in the neighborhood for her warm smile, but also for her guardedness when it came to strangers, an instinct sharpened years ago when her younger brother vanished during a hunting trip and was never found. That loss had made her fiercely protective of the people and memories around her. She called out, her voice carrying easily across the yard. "Officer Hayes, everything all right?" Daniel stepped out of the car, meeting her halfway along the sidewalk. "Evening, Mrs. Whitfield. I didn't mean to bother you." Her gaze shifted to the girl in the back seat, then back to him. "That's Emily, isn't it? I haven't seen her in a long time." Daniel nodded. "She was just visiting." Sarah's expression softened. That house was her world. Her parents were good people, always had time to chat, always helping at the town fair. She sighed, her breath clouding in the cold. "It's a shame what happened." Daniel kept his tone gentle. "She tells me she comes by sometimes." Sarah's eyes lingered on the house before she nodded. "I've seen her once or twice, standing there like she's waiting for someone to open the door. I didn't want to scare her off by saying anything." They spoke for a few more moments before Sarah retreated to her porch, pulling her cardigan tight. Daniel returned to the car. Emily was still running her fingers through Rex's fur, the dog's eyes half closed in contentment. Daniel crouched at the open door. "Emily, I'm going to take you back to the home, but maybe one day we can figure out a way to go inside together, safely. Would you like that?" Her eyes lit with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Really? Really?" he said, and glanced at Rex. "Right, partner?" Rex gave a single, slow wag of his tail, as if sealing the promise. As they pulled away from the curb, Emily twisted in her seat to watch the house disappear behind them. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, but in the rearview mirror, he saw Rex's head lift to rest gently on her shoulder. Silent reassurance that she wasn't alone, not tonight. The next afternoon brought a brittle kind of cold, the kind where the air felt like it might splinter if you moved too fast. The sky over Clearwater was a pale silver, clouds stretching thin across it like worn cloth. Daniel had thought about Emily all morning. He'd called the children's home to check on her and spoken briefly with the supervisor, Linda Keating, a short, sturdy woman in her early 50s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to her head. Linda's no-nonsense tone told him she was used to running a tight ship, but beneath it he heard a thread of concern. She admitted Emily sometimes wandered off when she was upset, but assured him she'd spoken to her about staying safe. By the time Daniel's shift took him near that old street again, he saw her small figure waiting. Coat zipped up to her chin, knit cap pulled low, and beside her Rex was already leaning toward the window, ears pricked, recognizing her before Daniel even slowed the car. He parked and stepped out, his boots crunching over a thin frost on the pavement. "Afternoon, Emily," he greeted. Her eyes lifted to meet his, hesitant but steady. "You said maybe we could go inside." Daniel glanced toward the old house, Its sagging porch still leaned, its windows still stared back, dark and unreadable. He knew it wasn't the safest place to be poking around, but he also knew what it meant to her. "All right," he said finally. "We'll take a quick look, but you stay right with me, and if I say we go, we go. Got it?" She nodded quickly. The front door, as he expected, was locked. Daniel tried the knob, felt it rattle uselessly against the latch. The paint around the frame had peeled in long strips, the wood beneath swollen from years of damp weather. Rex sniffed along the porch boards, his nose low, moving with purposeful intent. He paused at the far corner of the porch, ears twitching, then trotted down the steps. His nails clicked against the cement walkway as he padded toward the side of the house, disappearing from sight. "Stay here," Daniel told Emily, then followed. Behind the house, where the weeds grew high and tangled, the back steps led to a narrow stoop. Rex stood there, looking back at Daniel, his gaze sharp. The kitchen window above him was cracked open just enough to shift in the wind with a soft creak. Daniel crouched to peer inside. The dim light revealed a counter cluttered with dust-covered jars and a sink spotted with rust. The air smelled faintly of mold and old wood. He turned to Emily. "We can get in through here. I'll go first, then help you." She hesitated, glancing toward the front as if half expecting someone to come out and tell them no. "It's all right," he assured her. "Rex will be right here." That seemed to do it. Daniel gripped the sill, hoisted himself up, and swung one leg over. He landed softly inside, boots stirring dust from the linoleum floor. A shaft of muted light fell across the room from the window, illuminating the pale drift of cobwebs in the corners. He turned and reached for Emily. She climbed up with surprising agility for her size, and he steadied her as she dropped to the floor. Rex leapt easily through after them, landing with the controlled grace of a trained dog. Inside, the kitchen felt frozen in time. A faded calendar on the wall still showed a month and a year 3 years past. Chairs sat neatly pushed under a table where a thin film of dust softened every surface. Emily moved slowly, eyes sweeping the room. Her voice was quiet, reverent. "That's where Mom kept the cookie jar," she said, pointing to a spot on the counter. "And over there, Dad always left his coffee cup by the sink." Daniel followed as she walked into the hallway. The light grew dimmer here, shadows stretching along the scuffed floorboards. Each doorway they passed opened into rooms draped in white sheets, the outlines of furniture ghosting through the fabric. In the living room, Emily stopped. The large bay window at the front looked out over the street, its curtains drawn halfway. Dust hung in the air, swirling lazily in the weak light. "This was where we put the Christmas tree," she whispered. "It would glow at night, and you could see it from all the way down the block." Daniel kept close, letting her take her time. His eyes swept the corners, noting the sag in the ceiling plaster and the faint scent of dampness that came from somewhere deeper in the house. Rex ranged ahead, his nails tapping softly against the wood floor. He paused in each doorway, head lifting as he sniffed, then moved on. When he reached the back of the hallway, he stopped abruptly, ears forward, body tense. Daniel moved toward him. "What is it, boy?" Rex gave a short, quiet huff, not alarmed, but alert. He sniffed again at the air, then glanced back at Daniel as if satisfied nothing living was there, only old scents. Emily crouched beside him and rubbed his shoulder. "You're making sure it's safe, huh?" she murmured. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's his job, and he's very good at it." They ended up back in the kitchen where Daniel checked his watch. "All right, we've seen enough for today. I don't want to push our luck." Emily nodded, but her eyes lingered on the hallway behind them. She seemed lighter, somehow, still sad, but as if walking through the house had loosened something in her chest. Rex went out first through the window, landing softly on the stoop outside. Daniel lifted Emily down, then followed. The air outside felt sharper now after the stillness inside. As they walked back toward the front of the house, Emily glanced over her shoulder one last time. "Thank you," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at Rex. "You can thank him too. He's the one who found the way in." Emily smiled faintly and reached down to ruffle the fur along Rex's neck. "Thanks, Rex." The shepherd's tail swayed once, slow and sure, as if acknowledging her gratitude. The air inside the old house still hung heavy with the smell of dust and disuse. The dim light filtering through the bay window in the living room painted everything in shades of muted gold and gray. Daniel stepped cautiously over a sagging floorboard, scanning the room while Emily stood near the doorway, her small hands twisting the hem of her coat. Rex padded slowly across the center of the room, nose lowered, his paws barely making a sound against the worn wood. His movements were deliberate, each step driven by that deep instinct Daniel had come to trust without question. Emily's eyes moved slowly around the living room, her gaze snagging on the shadowed corners as though she could still see the life that once filled the space. Laughter, voices, the warmth of a fireplace in winter. She didn't speak, but her expression said enough. Rex paused suddenly near the far corner of the room where a faded floral rug lay unevenly against the floor. His ears twitched. His nose pressed down against the edge of the rug, sniffing in small circles. "What have you got, partner?" Daniel murmured, crossing to him. Rex gave a short, insistent woof, then used one paw to nudge at the edge of the rug. The movement revealed a small gap where the corner had curled up, and beneath it something hard knocked faintly against the floor when touched. Daniel crouched and peeled the rug back further. There, tucked just at the base of the wall, was a small wooden box, dark-stained, the brass hinges dulled with age. Dust clung to its surface, and a faint scuff on the lid suggested it had been moved once, long ago, before being left undisturbed for years. Emily took a hesitant step forward. "That's Mom's box." Her voice was little more than a whisper. Daniel glanced at her. "You remember it?" She nodded quickly. She kept important things in it, things she didn't want to lose. Daniel pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiping away the worst of the dust before easing the lid open. Inside, the air smelled faintly different, less of mildew, more of cedar, as though the box itself had been guarding its contents from the decay of the house around it. The first thing he saw was a thick photo album bound in cracked leather. Its pages were edged with the slight curl of age, but the photographs inside were vibrant with frozen moments. A toddler Emily smeared with frosting at a birthday party. Her mother, a petite woman with warm brown eyes and a laugh that seemed to leap off the page. Her father, broad-shouldered with a quiet smile, holding Emily high on his shoulders during a summer parade. Nestled beside the album was a small, well-worn stuffed dog, its once white fur now a pale cream, one ear bent permanently forward. A small pink ribbon was tied around its neck, faded but intact. The sight of it broke something in Emily. She dropped to her knees beside Daniel, reaching into the box with trembling hands. The moment her fingers closed around the toy, her shoulders hunched and tears began to spill freely down her cheeks. "This is Buddy," she whispered into the fabric, her voice muffled and shaky. "Dad gave him to me when I was 5, the night before my first day at school. He said Buddy would make sure I wasn't scared." Daniel let her have the moment, standing silently while Rex moved closer, sitting beside her and leaning gently into her side. Emily's small arm wrapped automatically around the dog's neck, her other hand clutching the stuffed animal tight against her chest. Daniel took out his phone, snapping careful photographs of the box, its contents, and where it had been found. He knew the legalities. Anything recovered from an abandoned property technically belonged to the estate, but he also knew the emotional weight of these items. He made a mental note to send these details to Marjorie Patel, a caseworker he trusted at the county's Child Services office. Marjorie was in her early 40s, with dark hair always pulled into a neat bun, and she had a reputation for fighting hard to reunite children with anything that gave them comfort. As Emily sat on the rug, rocking slightly with the stuffed dog in her arms, Daniel knelt to her level. "I'll make sure these get to the right people," he said gently. "So they can stay with you. They're yours, Emily." She nodded without looking up, pressing her face into Buddy's fur. Rex gave a low, approving rumble in his chest, his eyes flicking between Daniel and Emily as though satisfied he had done what was needed. Daniel reached down, giving the shepherd a firm scratch behind the ears. "Good work, partner. Couldn't have found it without you." Emily finally looked up, her cheeks blotchy from crying but her eyes clearer somehow. "Thank you," she whispered to both of them. Daniel closed the box carefully, keeping the album inside. He knew this was more than just a piece of wood and fabric. It was a tangible link to the life Emily had lost, a reminder that her parents had loved her fiercely, and sometimes holding something real was the only way to keep the memories from fading. They left the living room slowly, Rex leading the way toward the kitchen. As they stepped back into the cold afternoon air, Daniel felt the weight of the box in his hand and the lighter step in Emily's walk. For the first time since meeting her, he saw something new in her posture, not just grief, but the faintest spark of peace. The pale light of late afternoon stretched long shadows across the street as Daniel locked the patrol car. Emily stood beside him, still clutching the stuffed dog, Buddy, against her chest. Rex trotted ahead a few steps, ears swiveling at the faint sounds of the neighborhood wind through the bare branches, the distant creak of an old sign. The house directly to the right of Emily's old home had a wide, wrap-around porch lined with pots of dormant plants, their stems dree and brittle from the season's chill. On the porch, a rocking chair swayed gently with the wind, and behind it, the screen door eased open with a slow creak. An elderly woman stepped out, adjusting the knitted shawl draped over her narrow shoulders. Agnes Holloway was in her mid-70s, with a frame as delicate as the porcelain teacups she was rumored to collect. Her face bore the fine lines of both laughter and worry, and her gray hair, still thick, was pulled into a low, neat twist at the nape of her neck. Agnes had lived on this street for more than 50 years. Widowed young after her husband, a logger, died in a mill accident, she had raised her 2 sons alone and earned a reputation for her quiet resilience. She was not one for gossip, but when she spoke, her words carried weight. Her eyes moved from Daniel to Emily, softening instantly. "Well, I'll be," she murmured, stepping down the porch steps with careful precision. "Emily Carter. It's been too long since I last saw you." Emily hesitated, clutching Buddy tighter. Daniel stayed close, sensing her unease. Agnes's gaze slid to Daniel. "Officer Hayes," she greeted politely. "I saw your cruiser out front and wondered what brought you by." Daniel offered a faint smile. "Emily wanted to visit her old home. Thought I'd walk her over to say hello." Agnes's lips pressed into a small line, a gesture of both fondness and sadness. "Her parents were good folk," she said, her voice warm with memory. "John Carter could fix anything with a hammer and a bit of stubbornness, and Lily—" She looked at Emily. "Your mama had the kind of kindness that made people feel seen. She'd drop by with fresh bread or a basket of apples, even if she barely had enough for herself." Emily's eyes dropped to the ground, her voice quiet. "I remember the bread." Agnes reached out, her hand light on Emily's arm. "We all do, dear. After they passed, it was like the air went out of the street. No one wanted to live in that house, not because of fear exactly, but because the memories were so thick you could almost touch them." Daniel glanced toward the faded siding and sagging porch, understanding her meaning. From where he sat at Daniel's heel, Rex gave a slow, contented sigh, his amber eyes flicking from Agnes to Emily. The shepherd stayed close, his presence radiating a calm that seemed to settle the girl. Agnes's gaze softened further. "Wait here a moment." She turned and climbed the porch steps with a surprising swiftness for her age, disappearing inside the house. The faint scent of cedar and cinnamon wafted from the open door before it closed behind her. Emily shifted her weight, glancing toward Daniel. "She knew my mom?" Daniel nodded. "Sounds like she knew her well." A few minutes later, Agnes returned, holding something folded neatly in her hands. A knitted scarf, the deep red of autumn leaves. It was well made but worn in places, the kind of wear that spoke of years of use rather than neglect. "This," Agnes said, offering it to Emily, "was left at my house the last time your mother visited. She'd brought me a pie-apple, of course, and we sat on the porch talking until the sun went down. She forgot her scarf when she left. I kept it, thinking I'd return it next time I saw her, but that time never came." Emily took the scarf as though it might crumble under her fingers. She lifted it to her face, inhaling deeply, her eyes closing for just a moment. When she opened them, they shone brighter, as if a small piece of her mother had found its way back to her. "Thank you," she whispered. Agnes smiled faintly. "It's yours, where it belongs." She glanced at Daniel. "Take good care of her, Officer Hayes." "I will," Daniel promised. As they stepped back toward the patrol car, Emily looped the scarf around her neck. Rex patted at her side, occasionally bumping her leg with his head, as if approving of this new layer of warmth. By the time they reached the car, Emily was holding Buddy in one arm, the scarf wrapped snugly, and her free hand resting lightly on Rex's back. For the first time since he'd met her, Daniel thought she didn't look quite so small against the weight of the world. The next morning, Clearwater was wrapped in a pale fog that seemed to muffle every sound. Frost clung to the edges of rooftops, and the river's surface steamed faintly where the cold air met the warmer current. Daniel parked his cruiser outside the police station, his breath visible in the crisp air. Inside, the warmth of the building hit him immediately, along with the scent of coffee brewing in the break room. Officer Tom Grady, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a habit of wearing his duty belt slightly too loose, was leaning against the counter, stirring sugar into his mug. Tom was known for his easygoing humor, but Daniel knew him as someone who could turn deadly serious when the situation demanded it. "Morning, Hayes," Tom said, raising his mug in greeting. "You look like you didn't sleep much." Daniel poured himself a coffee, the dark liquid swirling into the cup. "I've been thinking about the Carter place," he admitted. Tom's brows lifted. "That old house Emily's been visiting?" Daniel nodded. "The town's planning to auction it off next month. I heard it from the clerk's office this morning." Tom frowned. "Auction it? For what condos? Storage lot?" "Probably to clear the land," Daniel said grimly. "If that happens, it's gone. And for Emily, that house is all she has left of her parents." Tom was quiet for a moment, then leaned back against the counter. "You can't save every place, Dan." Daniel took a sip of coffee, his gaze distant. "After I got back from deployment, I lost my family's place. Couldn't keep up with the payments, not with the bills piling in. One day, it was home. The next day, it was just someone else's property." He let out a slow breath. "I know what it feels like to lose that anchor. I don't want her to go through it again." Tom studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "If anyone can figure out a way, it's you." Later that afternoon, Daniel and Rex drove past Emily's street. The fog had lifted, revealing a brittle blue sky, but the air still bit at the skin. Emily wasn't there this time, probably still at the children's home, but something else caught Rex's attention. The shepherd's ears pricked forward, his head turning sharply toward the Carter house. He gave a low growl, one Daniel had learned to take seriously. Daniel pulled the cruiser over and stepped out. "What is it, boy?" Rex trotted ahead toward the front yard where a group of 3 teenage boys lingered near the sagging porch. They wore hooded sweatshirts and had that restless, aimless energy Daniel recognized, the kind that sometimes led to trouble. One of them held a can of spray paint. Another had a crowbar hanging loosely in his grip. "Hey!" Daniel's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and commanding. The boys froze. Rex stood at Daniel's side, his posture alert but controlled, amber eyes fixed on the intruders. One of the teens, a tall, lanky kid with pale hair peeking out from his hood, shifted uneasily. "We weren't doing anything," he muttered. Daniel took a slow step forward. "You're about to. This property is off limits. Move along." The boy with the crowbar glanced at Rex and seemed to think better of arguing. "Yeah. Okay," he said, backing away. The group shuffled off toward the corner, glancing over their shoulders until they were out of sight. Daniel rested a hand briefly on Rex's neck. "Good eyes, partner. That could have been a mess." They walked up to the porch, Daniel scanning for any damage. The old wood groaned under his weight, but everything appeared untouched. Still, the sight of those boys loitering there only reinforced the urgency pressing in on him. Back at the cruiser, Daniel sat for a moment, looking at the house through the windshield. The weathered siding, the sagging roof, the memories still alive in Emily's mind, it was all on borrowed time. He knew he couldn't just hope for the best. He would need to dig into property records, talk to the town council, maybe even track down any remaining legal family ties. There would be paperwork, costs, and resistance. But if it meant keeping the house standing for Emily, he was ready to take that fight on. Rex lay quietly in the passenger seat, but his steady presence was like a silent agreement. They were in this together. Daniel started the engine, a plan already forming in his mind. One way or another, he was going to keep that house from becoming another empty lot in the town's history. For 2 days, Daniel worked every spare minute digging through county records, old census files, and property archives. The dim light from his desk lamp pooled over stacks of paper, and the quiet rustle of turning pages was occasionally broken by the soft sound of Rex shifting on his blanket in the corner. The shepherd's presence kept Daniel grounded, reminding him why he was doing this. On the 3rd evening, Daniel's search turned up a name that made him sit straighter: Peter Carter. According to the file, Peter was a first cousin of Emily's late father, living in Spokane, Washington. The address was current, and there was even a phone number listed. Daniel didn't waste time. He dialed, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk as the line rang. A deep, steady voice answered. "Peter Carter speaking?" Daniel introduced himself, explained who Emily was and what had happened to her parents. As he spoke, there was a pause on the other end, a pause so long Daniel almost wondered if the call had dropped. Then Peter's voice came back, quieter, rougher. I didn't know," he said, the words thick. "John and I lost touch after I moved for work. I didn't even know he'd passed, let alone his little girl." Peter was in his late 50s, a tall, broad man with the weathered hands of someone who had spent years in carpentry. He had graying hair that curled slightly at the ends and a face lined not just by age, but by years of hard work and quiet responsibility. Widowed 5 years earlier, he had no children of his own, but there was a gentleness in his tone when Daniel mentioned Emily that made it clear he understood the weight of family. "I'm coming to Montana," Peter said finally, his voice firm. "I want to see her. I'll leave first thing in the morning." The next day was cold and clear, sunlight glinting off the thin sheen of frost that coated the streets. Daniel drove to the children's home, Rex riding shotgun, to pick up Emily. She seemed puzzled but hopeful when Daniel told her they had someone to meet. At the small diner near the edge of town, the bell above the door jingled as Peter stepped inside. His coat was thick, his boots scuffed from years of wear, and in his hands he carried a battered leather satchel. When his eyes found Emily, they softened instantly. Emily stood frozen for a moment. Buddy, the stuffed dog, clutched in her arms, the red scarf from Agnes wrapped snugly around her neck. Peter crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "Emily, I'm your dad's cousin. Your Uncle Peter, if you'd like to call me that." His voice was low, careful, as though speaking too loud might shatter the moment. "I didn't know, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." Her lip trembled. "You knew my dad?" "I did," he said, a faint smile flickering across his face. "When we were kids, we built a treehouse together that stayed standing for 20 years. Your dad was one of the best men I've ever known." Emily stepped forward hesitantly, and Peter opened his arms. She pressed into the hug, Buddy squished between them. Daniel stood a little back, watching the moment unfold. Beside him, Rex's tail wagged slowly, his amber eyes following Emily's every move. Then, as if sensing the right moment, Rex padded forward. Peter glanced down as the shepherd approached. Rex sniffed at his coat, then leaned gently against his leg. Peter chuckled, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Well, aren't you something? Guess you're keeping her safe, huh?" Emily's small voice piped up from Peter's side. "This is Rex. He's our friend." That made Peter smile wider. "Then I'm glad to meet you, Rex." They sat together in a corner booth. The waitress Marlene, a plump woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a habit of calling everyone Hon, bringing hot chocolate for Emily and coffee for the men. Conversation flowed more easily than Daniel expected. Emily told Peter about school, about Buddy, and about the time she stood outside the house just to feel closer to her parents. When Daniel mentioned the house's impending auction, Peter's expression grew thoughtful. "That house is family," he said firmly. "It's not going to strangers. I'll do whatever I need to keep it in the family's name and in Emily's life." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean we could keep it?" Peter nodded. "We can, and I'll be there with you." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were different, lighter, brighter. She leaned into Peter's side and he wrapped an arm around her, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder. Rex lay at their feet, his head on his paws, a quiet sentinel. But every so often, his tail gave a slow, contented thump against the floor, as if he understood the shift happening in Emily's world. When they stepped out into the cold afternoon, Emily walked between Daniel and Peter, one hand holding Peter's, the other resting lightly on Rex's back. The sun caught in her hair, and for the first time, Daniel thought she looked like a child who believed in tomorrow. The first hints of spring crept into Clearwater, loosening the frost from the eaves and sending the sound of dripping water down into the gutters. The snow along the edges of the Carter property had begun to retreat, revealing patches of brown grass eager for the sun. For weeks after their meeting, Peter and Daniel worked side by side on the old Carter house. Peter, with his carpenter's hands and unshakable patience, led the way, ripping out warped boards, sanding down window frames, and replacing loose shingles on the roof. Daniel handled the heavier repairs and the municipal paperwork to make sure the house was legally secure under Peter's name. Rex was a constant presence. The shepherd trotted from one man to the other like a foreman overseeing the crew, his sharp eyes always scanning the yard and his nose twitching at every passing breeze. If someone stopped on the sidewalk to watch the work, Rex would give them a cautious once-over before relaxing at Daniel's side. Emily visited nearly every day after school. She'd bound up the front steps, now repaired and sturdy, and slip into the house with a mix of awe and excitement. Sometimes she helped with simple tasks like dusting shelves or sorting through boxes, but mostly she explored the rooms that were slowly regaining their warmth. Her old bedroom, freshly painted a soft yellow, now had curtains just like the ones she remembered Peter had gone to 3 different fabric shops to find the right pattern. On one of those afternoons, Daniel noticed the way Emily lingered in the doorway of the living room, Buddy tucked under her arm. "What do you think?" he asked, nodding toward the newly sanded floor and the sunlight streaming through clean glass. Emily smiled, a shy but genuine curve of her lips. "It feels like home again." Peter, overhearing, looked up from where he was measuring trim along the baseboard. "That's exactly the point, kiddo." The small-town spirit began to show itself as neighbors dropped by to lend a hand. Agnes Holloway brought a basket of muffins for the workers, though Daniel suspected it was also an excuse to check on Emily. A retired plumber named Howard Briggs, stocky and cheerful with a thick white mustache, volunteered to fix the kitchen sink, claiming he'd never charge for work in a house that ought to stay in the family. Rex became something of a local attraction himself. Children walking home from school would wave at him through the open gate, and he'd wag his tail politely before returning to his self-assigned patrol of the property. Emily always made sure he had fresh water and a shady spot when the sun grew warm. Finally, the day came when the last nail was hammered, the last wall painted, and the last box unpacked. Peter stood in the middle of the freshly cleaned kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well," he said with a grin, "I'd say she's ready." That Saturday morning, Emily officially moved in with Peter. Daniel arrived early, Rex at his side to help carry her few belongings from the children's home. Emily wore the red scarf Agnes had given her, the ends fluttering in the mild breeze as she walked up the path to the front door. Inside, Peter had set the table with Emily's favorite breakfast pancakes with strawberries and placed a small vase of daisies in the center. The scent of fresh coffee and maple syrup drifted through the air. After breakfast, the 3 of them stepped out into the yard. The grass was still patchy, but it was theirs, and that mattered more than perfection. Emily ran toward the porch steps, Rex bounding after her. She laughed, a clear, ringing sound that carried down the street as the shepherd looped around her, tail wagging furiously. She darted one way, he mirrored her, their game spinning them in wide circles until they collapsed together on the grass, Emily's arms flung around his neck. Daniel leaned against the porch railing beside Peter, watching the scene unfold. The warmth in his chest surprised him. Not the fleeting satisfaction of finishing a job, but the deeper peace of seeing something broken mended. Peter glanced sideways. "You've done more than you know for her." Daniel shook his head. "She did the hard part. She held on." Rex trotted back toward them with Emily close behind, both of them slightly out of breath and grinning. Emily plopped down on the porch steps, her hand resting lightly on Rex's back. The shepherd settled beside her, content, his watchful eyes scanning the street as if making sure nothing would ever take this away from her again. For Daniel, it was a perfect picture. A home reclaimed, a family reconnected, and a loyal dog standing guard over the memories they'd fought to preserve. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not sudden flashes of light from the heavens, but the quiet moments where love, perseverance, and kindness bring a broken life back together. In Emily's story, God's hand was in the small details, the loyal dog who guarded her memories, the officer who cared enough to listen, the uncle who came just in time to restore her home. These are the ways the Lord works in our everyday lives, sending the right people, the right help, at the right moment. In our own days, we may pass by someone who is holding on to their last thread of hope. A kind word, a helping hand, or simply being present could be the miracle they've been praying for. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can believe in the power of love and God's timing. Comment Amen if you believe that He can restore what was lost, and may God bless everyone watching this right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might inspire you or someone you love.